that side I am totally a Swede, but not a blue-eyed, blonde-haired type of Swede. In Sweden, there's different kinds of folks. There are those who are native to the area, and they're called Laplanders, if you're familiar with that. Yeah. And so my descent is from them, rather than the Viking type of Scandinavian person. So that's why I have brown hair and brown eyes and look the way I do, you know, ugly and so on. Well, today we just want to talk about Venersborg and why is it here? I mean, it's not a seaport. It's not on a main division of a trail. There's no real justifiable reason to have a community out here in the sticks. There's no minerals, there's no mine, there's nothing. Why are you here? You know, why did the people come here? And so we want to look at some of the origins of that and explain why people got here and who got here and some of the major factors that contributed. Well, the first major contributor for people being here in Venersborg is probably not what you're thinking. And so what I want to talk about first is how's that look? We got the sun shining in here. I don't know if you can read that.
Yeah, better results.
Okay.
It'll resolve itself.
The Yacolt Burn is a major impact to what happened here at Venersborg. Next is why and who the people are that came here, because they were different than the other kinds of folks that were around. And then third, how did the church play a part in people being here in Venersborg? These three are major impactors in why there is a Venersborg and why the people are here. And so, starting with the first one, the Yacolt Burn, I don't know if you can see this well, but this is yesterday's jet stream announcement from NOAA. And the upper jet stream is what we want to look at right here. And if you can see the outline of the United States, Alaska, upper Canada here, the Hudson's Bay right in here, and the United States, Florida, you can see the outline of the US there. And over here is Russia, Serbia up north. And the jet streams have a major impact on weather. And that had a major impact on why people are here in Venersborg, or we're here at the start of it. So the polar jet stream comes in like a snake, and it runs over the Pacific Ocean and is influenced by the temperature of the water and several other things. But then it swoops up and goes into Alaska, leaving this area right here, as we're experiencing right now, without clouds, you know, very few, and so on, because the weather is headed up to Alaska. So all the clouds and other stuff is going up there. This is not the way it was back in the early days when the settlers came here. The jet stream was significantly different. So we can see this one that's going right in there. And here is the Gulf of Alaska right here. And what I want to show is there is Venersborg right there. This is a Google map, so you see the little red dot there for the Google map. And that was the pattern of the jet stream. It had a bigger swoop down over warmer waters back in those days, and this was a strong pattern. It didn't matter what time of year you were in, it still configured itself like this until huge storms would come in off the Pacific and would break it down. But immediately after that storm passed, it would rebuild. And this swoop up into Alaska cooled the air, because there's cooler air and cooler water up in here. And on its way down, it would enter into the land in Canada rather than down on us. This pattern would be in the middle of January. We would have days of bright, sunshiny, cold, clear weather. You know, it was really nice. It was cold and the humidity was low and so on. And in the summer, it was the same thing. It would get hot here. So the temperatures back in those days was easily over 100 in the summer, many times through the summer. And in winter, it was below 0. This creek, Olson Creek that runs back here, I used to walk on it. It was solidly frozen all the way to the ground. You know, and it got cold here because of this jet stream pattern that was happening up above. So all of the early forecasts, like in the late 50s and early 60s, that's all they would show you on the forecast because you could predict what was happening just by looking at the jet stream. Okay, so with that in mind, we have lows that come in following the jet stream and they drag them along. And if they weren't powerful enough, they would follow the jet stream and be drugged by it and hauled right into Canada in British Columbia, and they would dump rain up there. Through the summer, through the winter, it would be colder and so on. Well, that would create high pressures over here between the Cascades and the Rocky Mountains. So we got a high out here in this area and a low over here. That created what we called east winds. And back in those days, the east wind was a prevailing wind. It was not just 1 or 2 days. This came and it blew, and it blew, and it blew. I don't know if you've lived in areas where the wind blows and blows and blows, like there's places in San Bernardino in California and other places up around Yakima. There's places up there that blow and blow and blow. Well, we had that here in Venersborg, where it would blow and blow coming down through the Columbia River Gorge, and the east wind would blow dry air, always low humidity. If the storm was strong enough, it would shoot on through and come in and hit. But after it passed, the jet stream would rebuild itself and go up into that pattern again. And that was the typical pattern for the weather here at Venersborg. And as a result of it, we had a strong east wind. So you need to keep that in mind. A strong east wind that would blow especially strong in springtime and fall, because those were the times when the storms were strong enough to break through and create big lows out there as well. So contributor number 1 for people being in Venersborg, not what you're thinking, was the jet stream. Okay? Contributor number 2 for people being in Venersborg was man and his indifference toward the natural resources that we had. We had huge trees here. I don't know if you've been walking around in the woods out here, but you can stumble across a stump that will be, you know, significant in size. Over the hill of my house today, there's a 10-foot diameter stump sitting down there right along the creek. They were big trees, and there were many of them. And so people just got used to them and didn't think of them very much of value. So when people were trying to farm, it was in their way. These great big trees. They didn't care about them. They had enough wood. You know, wood was so plentiful that a cord of wood being split and sold in that day was $1.25. So to give you a feel for the size of the trees back then, they were typically 4 to 6 feet in diameter around here, just average. The one at my place I'm saying is 10. It was kind of unusual. And I want to give you a feel for the age of those trees by showing you a piece of wood that is made from them. And Jacqueline Freeman was kind enough to put this together, but it has some of the genuine yellow fir, which is different than Douglas fir. Okay, if you're a tree expert, you know the difference. If you look at the grains on this, you'll see that in an inch or so here, you've got close to 50 years in an inch. So if you've got a 4-foot diameter tree, and you start here and count out, you've got a tree that's approaching 900 years old.
Wow.
So, and that's what was living out here. It was a mature forest, but it was a good forest. It was not broken down. And so that 10-foot tree down behind my house is probably in the neighborhood of 1,500 years. So I'll send this around. You can get a feel for what courageous was for the guys to chop these trees down. So they would put in springboards right here to get above the swell of the stump, and then they would chop in a notch, and they would take a saw and start sawing on one side to get through. And these yellow firs had a lot of pitch, a lot. That's what made them so good, and they lived. The wood lived so long in damp climates. So they would pour on oil to solventize the pitch so that you could continue to pull the saw through. And so it was a task to cut one of these things down. it was days to cut this guy down. It wasn't just a, go over there and cut it down in a couple hours. This was a long time. You can see the size of the chips right here. Those guys had cut that with what's called falling axes. They don't make them anymore. The falling axe is a special, thin, light axe, and it works on the principle of speed. And so they would throw the axe in really hard and fast. The axe was so thin, it would go into this wood 2.5 inches. Just whack! And so you can see the size of the chips down below when they were whacking away to cut that notch in. And so trees, they just weren't valuable. Wood was cheap, it was plentiful, everybody had it. I mean, nobody had a need for it. You could go out in your backyard and get enough to get you through heating your house. Again, nobody cared. And that's a contributor, and I'm going to point out why, for why people are in Venersborg today. Okay, so we've got big trees that nobody cares about, and we've got an east wind that blows in a continual basis. The contributors here. So here's what they tried to do. Here's a place here that's just on the other side of Bell Mountain, where a guy is right there, has a horse pulling a horse-drawn mower, and he's trying to mow hay, and he has cut down some trees. You can see the height of these guys. He's putting around here with his horse trying to cut this hay and take it in. And so he's trying to farm. And to him, these trees were a nuisance. And if a forest fire came, so much the better. He didn't have to burn them. The forest fire would take him out and help him out. So the Yacolt Burn got its start upriver, above Wind River. Up here, beyond Kamis-Washougal, upriver. And there's several theories as to how it got started, but this little line right here with the little hitch marks on it is the extent of the fire of the 1902 version. 240,000 acres of these big 6-foot diameter trees burned. Huge fire. There was a powerful east wind coming this way, down the gorge. Columbia River runs right here. This fire took off. It took 2 days to get from here to there. When the low that was creating the low versus high in the weather pattern brought rain in and helped put it out. So we've got a fire from September 6th until the 12th before it went out. Nobody fought it. It just, no, there it is, it's burning. Let it go. And it was definitely man-caused. So a while, because there were 38 lives lost in this, and the fire moved so fast that there's pictures of a pig, well actually 3 pigs, standing there in the ground, vertically up, fried completely. And a man sitting in the door of his household, holding the buggy whip in his hand as though he were getting up to go, fried completely. This is a nasty fire. So they hauled this guy into court up in Walla Walla, but he was an intimidating fellow. And the guys who were going to witness against him got scared. And so they wouldn't, and he was acquitted, and he went off scot-free. So that was one theory for how this fire got started. It's the one I think has the most weight. There's another one that there was a flat-bottom boat going up the river and had to stop and get wood for his boilers. And the men were out getting the wood, and a wasp or a hornet came out of the pile of wood, so they got aggravated, took a piece of coal in there and stuck it in there to burn out the wasps. And so there's some merit to that theory. Another one was over in Oregon at this time, in the Bridal Veil area, right about here. There was a major fire in Oregon, and the east wind as it blows creates eddy currents, and they feel that some of the ash and sparks was carried across the river and started it on the Washington side. This guy here, in the reading that I've done, he sounds shaky. But anyway, the fire is a crown fire that was happening starting up here. I don't know if you know much about fires, but crown fires are unusual in the fact that the trees are burning here. The heat is being blown sideways by the east wind. Okay, this heat is going, you can't see it, but it's going. It goes to the next bunch of trees over here. It essentially vaporizes all of the fluids in the trees downstream. they turn into a gaseous mixture. It's as though you had a tin of gasoline there and the fumes were coming. So as the heat hits the tree, the sap vaporizes. And if you were looking at it, you would see little jets coming out of the tree with the vapor just shooting into the air. And if you get enough of it, it only takes a spark and it goes off like a bomb. And it makes a big boom. Anybody here worked in the forest products?
Yeah, Joseph did the Yellowstone fires, and he told me about that. That he would see explosions, and a whole tree would just
Yes.
Serious.
Hello, Joseph. Just talking about you. Give off of this gaseous mixture, which is very combustible. And it would be down there, all it would take, it's already heated, it's superheated. All it would take is a spark, and it goes off like a bomb. It doesn't just, go poof, it goes boom. And if you're near it, it'll put your eardrums out. I mean, the concussion is like that. Then the vapor inside and underneath the bark of the tree is so hot that it ignites almost by itself, and the tree literally blows up. It blows the bark right off the tree. If you've been around a lightning storm, when a lightning strike is hitting a tree and it runs all the way down the tree and it blows the bark off, it's pretty noisy. But if you can imagine the whole tree just go boom. And so you have these explosions above you in the air that you can't see any reason for it to burn. Because that's a gaseous mixture that has been vaporized by the heat from the other burning tree. Crown fires are extremely dangerous. They are powerful, they move fast. This one was moving, they estimate, at 40 miles an hour. You can't outrun it. It's really a terrible thing. And so we had about 239,000 acres of prime timber go up in smoke in this fire. And they say that the storm finally came in that created the low, that created the east wind, that created all the problem, and helped put it out. And since that time, there have been 8 reburns in the Yacolt Burn. But Venersborg got hit. This is before anybody's here. This is 1902 time frame that the forest fire came through here and fried everything. Killed all the trees and wiped out things. So we want to talk about what kind of losses there were here just for fun, because back in 02, they estimated the loss of the timber at 30,000 or 30 million. But we have to take into account that they were practicing a thing called high grading. If anybody's a logger here, high grading is that when you bring your timber down and you look at it, you find a knot, you roll that one off. You only take the knot-free wood. Today we take the whole tree. Back then, they high graded and picked only the stuff that was suitable, stuff that would make the sample of wood that's going around. And so if we put in the rest of the tree, they only took like 10 or 15% of the tree. If we took the rest of the tree, this number goes huge, And then if we change it into today's dollars, it goes really huge. This was a major loss. And the early estimates of 12 billion board feet is also in the same faction. If we took in the whole tree, that number would just get huge. This is a big fire, and it's really impacted the natural resources of the United States. So there was somebody back then who said and calculated if there were no other fires than that 02 one, which burned 240,000 acres, they could anticipate a $4 million a year input in 1952 dollars. So a sustainable input every year coming off of the burnt out forest, making it sustainable. At that point in time, there were 35 lives lost. No one has an accurate count. The place was sparsely populated and people, weren't always accountable. And it's ranked second behind the Yacolt Burn, which is down. Oregon folks had to reforest it. But the reason that it was second is that it was rated in acres lost. But the Yacolt Burn still outnumbers everybody else in board feet of value of timber lost. And so they say that if it was unburnt and managed in a sustainable yield fashion, like they're trying to do with forests today, that there's enough stuff coming out of that 240,000 to employ everybody in Portland and Vancouver with forest products. That's the impact to our country of losing this to fire. Okay, and I'm saying here there were 8 additional reburns, and I got to see one in 52. As a fire came over the hill, right over there, like that, huge columns of smoke, and we were getting pretty scared. So after about 1955, they had enough roads and enough water places where they dug out to get springs and build a little pond for water, that the fires in the Yacolt Burn were finally controlled. And they minimized the potential. And at church, we sing a song that says it only takes a spark to get a fire going. And that is so true with forest fires. It only takes a spark. Okay, so I'm not covering a whole bunch of other stuff. There's a really neat story behind what the state did, because they only had one forester for the whole state at the time of this 1902 burn. And they decided that, hey, we need to do something better here to control fires. There's a real neat story about that. The reforestation efforts, perhaps you've heard that the one that worked around here on Bell Mountain is where they froze the little tree in a cone and then shot it out pneumatically from a helicopter into the ground, and then the tree would start and grow. And there's really neat stories about how they rejuvenated the forest here and are now working with sustainable yield programs. The salvage operations that they took here, it was amazing, because when you took a charred log into the mill and the saw starts cutting it, there's a very fine dust, charcoal dust that floats. It's black. If you've been around a dust storm in the east, you know that you can close your windows tight, it still crawls through. This stuff did the same thing. It went everywhere into everything. And the men at the end of the day, they looked like coal miners. They were black, head to toe. And they would lose their glasses too. Then in the 30s, the country was in a depression, and the CCC boys were up there. They helped make some of the roads that are still being used for fire control. There's a big story around that, and a really neat story is about the honor camps and how we used the labor from our prison system to reforest and to control fires.